was another busy evening at one of the finest hotels in New York, the kind of place where luxury drips from every chandelier and where people expect the best. But not everyone knows how to act like they belong. A man, loud, arrogant, entitled, stood at the front desk ripping into a young employee, his voice carried across the lobby, complaining about some ridiculous inconvenience. "This is unacceptable. Do you even know who I am?" he barked, slamming his fist on the counter. People turned their heads, whispering, watching. But one man in the room wasn't just watching, he was analyzing. Donald Trump sat comfortably in the plush seating area nearby, his sharp eyes locked on the scene. He knew business, he knew people, and most importantly, he knew respect. And what he was witnessing? Total disrespect. Unacceptable. The employee, clearly shaken, tried to remain professional. "Sir, I'm really sorry for the misunderstanding. Let me fix this for you." But the rude customer wasn't interested in a solution. He was interested in making someone feel small. Trump had seen enough. He stood up, adjusted his suit, and with that unmistakable presence, strong, powerful, unshakable, he walked right up to the counter. The second the customer saw him, his entire demeanor shifted, the arrogance, the attitude. It all drained from his face in an instant. Trump smirked. "You like to talk big, huh? Yell at people, act important. But let me tell you something. Real power, real success, it's not about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. That kid behind the counter, he's working. He's earning. He's doing something with his life. What are you doing? Throwing a tantrum like a spoiled brat?" The lobby went silent. The customer's mouth opened, then closed. No words, nothing. He had nothing. Trump turned to the employee, gave him a firm nod. "You're doing great. Keep working hard, and one day, who knows, you might be running a place like this." And just like that, Trump walked away, leaving the entire room buzzing. The customer? He slinked off, suddenly not so loud anymore. And the young employee? He stood taller, prouder. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to remind you of your worth. The lobby of the hotel was buzzing, a mix of wealthy travelers, business moguls, and well-dressed tourists all moving in and out of the grand entrance. The kind of place where everything gleamed, from the polished marble floors to the massive crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. But not everyone understood what real class looked like. Some people thought money alone made them important. That was the mistake this guy was making. He was standing at the front desk, leaning over the counter like he owned the place, his voice cutting through the elegant atmosphere like nails on a chalkboard. Loud, aggressive, completely full of himself. His suit was expensive, his watch even more so, but none of that could cover up the way he was acting. Rude, entitled, treating the young hotel employee like a personal punching bag. "This is ridiculous. I don't wait. I don't do mistakes. Do you have any idea who I am?" His voice carried through the room, making people turn their heads. But he didn't care. He was the center of attention, exactly where he wanted to be. The employee was young, maybe early 20s, standing there in his neatly pressed uniform, clearly trying to keep his composure. You could see it in his face. He'd been trained for situations like this, told to remain calm, stay professional, no matter how nasty a customer got. But that wasn't easy when someone was throwing insults like punches. "I'm very sorry, sir," the employee said, his voice steady, though you could tell he was rattled. "If there was a mistake, I'd be happy to fix it for you." That only seemed to make things worse. The customer scoffed, rolling his eyes, shaking his head like he couldn't believe the incompetence he was dealing with. He slammed his hand on the counter, making the pens in the holder jump. "No, not good enough. I don't want you to fix it. I want to know how someone like you even got this job in the first place." There it was, the moment where it went from frustration to humiliation. This guy wasn't just mad about whatever minor inconvenience had set him off. He was enjoying this. Enjoying making someone feel small. Enjoying the power trip. And that was a mistake, because while he was busy throwing his tantrum, he had no idea who was sitting just a few feet away. Donald Trump, relaxed in one of the oversized leather chairs near the lobby fireplace, had been watching the whole thing. He'd been flipping through a newspaper, but now it was folded in his lap. His eyes, sharp and assessing, were locked onto the scene unfolding at the desk. Trump knew people. He could spot strength, and he could spot weakness. What he was seeing? A guy who thought power came from yelling, from belittling, from making a scene. But how he was speaking, the guy who thought power came from yelling, from belittling, from making a scene. Wrong. Trump had built empires, dealt with the toughest negotiators, walked through fire and came out stronger. He knew what real power looked like. And it wasn't that. For a moment he just observed. Let the guy dig himself deeper, let him keep talking, keep embarrassing himself. The people in the lobby were uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats, whispering, glancing toward the front desk but not daring to intervene. Nobody wanted to deal with a guy like that, but Trump, he had no problem stepping in. Slowly he stood up, adjusted his jacket, smoothed his tie. Then, with that unmistakable presence, that confidence that filled a room the second he walked in, he strode toward the desk. The second the customer saw him, his entire demeanor shifted. You could see it in his face. Shock, panic. He knew exactly who was standing in front of him now, and suddenly, all that fake power, all that tough guy act, it started to crumble. Trump didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. "You like to talk big?" he said, his voice even, controlled, but carrying the weight of someone who'd commanded boardrooms full of billionaires. "Like to yell, make a scene? You think that makes you important?" The customer stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. I was just trying to get some service here. That's all." Trump tilted his head slightly, that knowing smirk appearing, like he was looking at an amateur trying to play in a league way out of his depth. "No, that's not what you were doing. What you were doing was trying to make yourself feel powerful by tearing someone else down. And let me tell you something, real power, real success, it doesn't look like that." The lobby was dead silent. Every single person was watching now, leaning in, hanging on to every word. Trump turned toward the young employee, gave him a quick nod. "You're doing great. Keep working hard. You're the kind of person who makes places like this run." Then, back to the customer. "And you could learn a thing or two from him." The customer had nothing to say now. He just stood there, face red, hands clenched at his sides, looking like he wanted to disappear. Trump let the silence hang for a moment. Then, with one last glance at the employee, he gave him a pat on the back and walked away, just as effortlessly as he'd arrived. And just like that, the power in the room had shifted. The young employee stood taller. The entire energy of the place felt different. The customer, he wasn't yelling anymore. In fact, he wasn't talking at all. He grabbed his bags and walked out, fast. Because when you try to act big in front of someone who's actually big, it doesn't end well. And that's the thing. Respect is earned, not demanded. Power isn't in the volume of your voice, but in the strength of your presence. And if you don't know the difference, you might just find yourself being taught a lesson. Especially if Donald Trump is watching. The second Donald Trump saw what was happening, he knew exactly what kind of guy he was dealing with. He had seen it a million times before. The type who walks around like he's the most important person in the room, chest puffed out, voice louder than necessary. Throwing his weight around like that somehow proves something. The type who mistakes arrogance for strength, who thinks belittling others makes him look powerful. It was weak, it was embarrassing, and worst of all, it was completely unnecessary. Donald Trump didn't tolerate that kind of nonsense. He built his empire on discipline, respect, and an iron will. He dealt with kings, presidents, CEOs, world-class negotiators, and he never once needed to yell to get his way. That was the difference between real power and fake power. And this guy at the counter, he was all fake. It was time someone reminded him of that. Donald Trump stood up, straightened his tie, and walked over with that signature stride, the kind of walk that commanded attention without even trying. People noticed immediately. The murmurs in the lobby got quieter. All eyes turned. The employee behind the counter saw him first, and you could see the shift in his expression. A flicker of recognition, then a kind of stunned relief. It was as if, in that moment, he knew someone was stepping in who actually had his back, someone who wouldn't let this guy keep running his mouth unchecked. The customer, still mid-rant, had no idea Trump was now standing just a few feet away. He was too busy hearing himself talk, too caught up in the little power trip he had created. Then, all of a sudden, he felt it, that presence, that undeniable force standing right behind him. Something changed in the air, something big. He turned slightly, and the moment his eyes landed on Donald Trump, everything about him shifted. You could see it, the flash of panic, the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the most powerful man in the room anymore. Trump looked him up and down, slowly, deliberately, the way a man who's seen it all does when he's sizing someone up. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The customer, who just seconds ago had been shouting like he owned the place, was now stammering, clearing his throat, trying to salvage whatever dignity he thought he had left. Trump took his time, let the silence stretch, let the guy sweat for a second. Then, finally, he spoke. "What's the problem here?" The voice, that unmistakable voice, strong, controlled, effortless. It wasn't loud, but it carried. It cut through the air like a knife. The customer hesitated. For the first time since this whole thing started, he hesitated. There was a mistake with my reservation and... Trump held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No nonsense, no time for excuses. You think this is how you handle it? You think yelling at some kid behind a counter makes you look important? Let me tell you something, it doesn't. It makes you look weak." The guy swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. What was he going to do? Argue with Donald Trump? That wasn't going to end well. Trump turned to the employee, gave him a quick nod. "You're doing fine. You stay professional, you keep working hard, and one day you'll be the guy running this place. People like him?" Trump tilted his head toward the customer without even looking at him. "They don't last. They burn out. They fold. Because the real world doesn't reward guys who throw tantrums. It rewards guys who show up, put in the work, and don't crack under pressure." The employee nodded, standing up a little straighter, his confidence suddenly returning. It was like watching someone go from feeling defeated to realizing they were never actually losing in the first place. Trump turned back to the customer, his expression unreadable, but that smirk just barely there. "And you want respect? You earn it. You don't demand it by throwing a fit in the middle of a hotel lobby." The guy had nothing to say. Nothing. He just stood there, face flushed, hands fidgeting, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world but standing in front of Donald Trump at that moment. Trump let the silence hang again. Then, with a final glance at the employee, he gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder and turned to walk away. That was it. No need for more. No need to drag it out. Trump had made his point, and everyone in the room knew it. The energy in the lobby had completely shifted. The power dynamic had flipped. Trump didn't have to yell, didn't have to make a scene. He just did what he always did. He walked in, took control, and left everyone knowing exactly who was in charge. As he walked away, the customer, now looking completely deflated, muttered something under his breath, grabbed his bags, and practically sprinted toward the exit. No more yelling, no more demands, just gone. The employee, still standing behind the counter, let out a breath. You could see it, the realization that he had just witnessed something he'd never forget. A moment that reminded him that no matter who tried to tear him down, respect and dignity would always win in the end. And Donald Trump? He didn't even need to look back. He already knew how it ended. He had seen it all before. He had dealt with tougher guys, bigger egos, stronger opponents. This was nothing. Just another lesson taught, another power move executed flawlessly, another moment where the real winner in the room wasn't the one shouting the loudest. It was the one who actually knew what power looked like. The young employee stood behind the counter, shoulders tense, hands gripping the edge just to keep himself steady. He had dealt with rude customers before, but this one was different. This one wasn't just complaining about a mistake. He was making it personal, tearing him down, treating him like he was nothing. Every word, every insult, it was designed to humiliate. It was designed to break him. He was trying to hold it together, but deep down, something inside him was starting to crack. Donald Trump saw it all, every moment, every little shift in the kid's expression. He saw the way his posture had started to shrink, the way his voice had wavered just slightly even as he tried to stay professional. Trump had seen that look before. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to have someone try to make you feel small. He had dealt with it his whole life, the doubters, the critics, the ones who said he wouldn't make it. And he knew one thing for sure: the second you let them see you break, they win. Donald Trump wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. Not in his presence. Trump stepped in, took control, shut the loudmouth down like he was flipping a switch. The moment he spoke, the entire room shifted. The energy changed. The loud customer who had been so bold just seconds ago suddenly had nothing to say. He had all the fake power in the world when he was yelling at some kid behind a counter, but now? Now he was standing in front of Donald Trump, and he knew he had lost. But Trump wasn't just there to put the guy in his place. That was easy. What mattered more was the kid. The one who had just spent the last 10 minutes being torn apart by some overgrown child who thought he could get away with it. That's where the real moment was. Trump turned to the employee, eyes sharp, steady, that unmistakable intensity in his voice. "Listen to me," he said, and suddenly the kid wasn't just an employee anymore. He wasn't just some random worker at the front desk. He was someone Trump was speaking to directly, someone he was addressing like he actually mattered. Because he did. "You're doing fine. Better than fine. You handled yourself well. You didn't back down, you didn't lose control. That's what matters. That's what people remember. Not this guy. Not his yelling. Not his insults. People like that, they come and go, but you've got something real. You've got the ability to hold your ground when it counts, and let me tell you something. That's exactly how you win in life." The kid didn't speak at first. He just looked at Trump, blinking like he couldn't believe what was happening. Like he couldn't believe that in the middle of all this, Donald Trump was standing there, telling him that he wasn't just some kid behind a counter. He was bigger than that. "You work here now," Trump continued, voice unwavering. "But that doesn't mean this is where you'll always be. Maybe one day you run a place like this. Maybe one day you own a place like this. But I'll tell you how that happens. It happens by remembering moments like this. By remembering that no matter how much money someone has, no matter how loud they yell, no matter how important they think they are, the real power is in how you carry yourself. You keep your composure, you stay strong, and in the end, you win." The employee's back straightened. His grip on the counter loosened. The weight that had been pressing down on him, that heavy feeling of humiliation, of embarrassment, of not being enough, it was gone. Donald Trump had just flipped the script. He had taken the worst moment of this kid's day and turned it into something completely different. The loud customer, he wasn't even important anymore. He was just some guy who had embarrassed himself in front of a room full of people and got put in his place by someone who actually mattered. Trump wasn't done. He gave the employee one last look, then glanced back at the lobby full of people who had been watching the whole thing unfold. "You all saw what happened here," he said, addressing the entire room now. "You saw how this guy treated him. You saw how he carried himself. And now you see how it ends. The loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes the real strength is in saying nothing, in holding your ground, in letting the world see who you really are." People nodded. You could see it in their faces. They understood. They had just witnessed something real, something raw, something they wouldn't forget. Trump turned back to the employee one last time. "You keep working hard. You don't let people like that shake you. And who knows, maybe one day I'll be staying at your hotel." The employee let out a breath, and this time there was a small smile on his face. Not forced, not fake, just real. A moment ago he had been standing there, feeling humiliated, feeling small. Now? Now he felt something else entirely. He felt like he had just learned something, like he had just been given something that would stick with him for the rest of his life. Donald Trump turned and walked away, leaving the entire room buzzing with energy. The employee stood a little taller. The customer, the one who had thought he was the most important man in the room, had already slinked off, his head down, his confidence shattered. And everyone who had witnessed it? They knew. They had just seen something special. Because that's what Donald Trump did. He didn't just put people in their place. He lifted the right ones up. He knew who had what it took and who didn't, and that employee, he had it. He just needed someone to remind him. Donald Trump watched as the rude customer stormed out of the hotel lobby, his face red, his confidence shattered. A man who thought he had all the power had just learned a hard lesson. But the real moment wasn't about him. The real moment was about the young employee who had just gone through an experience he would never forget. He had started out standing there, taking insult after insult, trying to stay professional while someone who thought he was bigger than life tried to tear him down. But now he wasn't just standing there. He was standing tall. He wasn't just some employee anymore. He was someone who had just learned one of the most important lessons in life. Power isn't about who yells the loudest. Power is about presence. Power is about knowing who you are and standing your ground. Power is what Donald Trump had just demonstrated in front of everyone. And that young man had seen it firsthand. Trump walked back toward the counter, his expression calm, confident, controlled. He looked the employee right in the eye, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the kind of steady, unshakable confidence that comes from years of being at the top. And when Donald Trump speaks to you, you listen. That, Trump said, voice firm, is how you handle business. You don't let guys like that walk all over you. You stay in control. You don't crack. You don't lose your cool. You don't let them win. The employee nodded, his shoulders squaring, his posture stronger now. He had just been put through a trial by fire, but he had come out the other side not weaker, but stronger, and Donald Trump knew it. Trump wasn't just about shutting down the loudmouths of the world. He was about building up the ones who actually had what it took to succeed. He saw something in that employee. He saw potential. He saw resilience. He saw someone who, if he played his cards right, could go far. And Donald Trump knew exactly how to make that happen. You work here now, Trump said, glancing around the hotel, taking in everything. But that's just a starting point, not a finish line. You think I started at the top? No. I built my way there. I worked. I learned. I made the right moves. And I didn't let anyone tell me I wasn't good enough. The employee was listening intently now. He wasn't just hearing the words. He was absorbing them. Trump leaned in slightly, his voice lowering, but not in a way that made it any less powerful. If anything, it made it even more impactful. Most people, he said, they let moments like this define them in the wrong way. They take the hit. They let it shake them. They start believing the nonsense guys like that spew, and you know what happens? They stay stuck. They never move up. They never take control. But not you. Not if you do this right. Because here's the thing. Success doesn't come from avoiding these moments. Success comes from facing them, standing your ground, and knowing that when the dust settles, you're still standing. And the employee exhaled, and you could see it. A change, a shift, a realization. He wasn't just an employee behind a counter anymore. He was someone who had just learned a principle that would stick with him forever. And Donald Trump could see it happening in real time. He had given advice to world leaders. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals. He had shaped industries, built empires, and changed the course of history. But right now he was changing one life. And sometimes that was just as important. Trump straightened up, adjusted his jacket, took one last look at the young man in front of him. "You're gonna go far," he said. "If you remember this moment. If you remember that respect isn't given, it's earned. If you remember that the strongest guy in the room isn't the one yelling, it's the one who knows exactly who he is, no matter who's standing in front of him. The employee's nod was firm now, not just polite, not just out of respect. It was a nod of understanding, a nod of someone who had just learned something that most people take a lifetime to figure out. Trump turned slightly, glancing back at the rest of the lobby, the people who had been watching, witnessing everything that had happened. They had seen how it played out. They had seen the difference between real power and fake power. They had seen the difference between arrogance and confidence. And Donald Trump knew that this moment would stick with them too, because it wasn't just about a rude customer. It wasn't just about one employee. It was about something bigger. It was about how you handle yourself in life, how you handle pressure, how you handle adversity. Trump started to walk away, but then, as if remembering one last thing, he turned back to the employee. "One more thing," he said, pausing just for a second to make sure the moment landed. "The next time someone like that walks in here and starts acting like they own the place, you remember one thing: they don't. The person who controls the room isn't the one making the most noise, it's the one who doesn't need to." And with that, Trump walked off, leaving the young employee standing behind the counter, standing taller than he had ever stood before. And from that day forward, he never forgot that lesson.